Tech Trends 24/7 Leaders is a passionate podcast hosted by James P. Quinn on technology innovation. It provides insightful interviews with key and inspiring innovators in areas of corporate technology, office of the future, AI, real estate, sustainability, assistive technologies, and other emerging technologies. Tech Trends 24/7 Leaders will smartly position you where your business, life, and industries are moving for the future.
John Day, Chief Commercial Officer of CleanArc Data Centers, leads sales, leasing, and marketing activities. With nearly 30 years of experience in technology sales, M&A, capital formation, and real estate, John specializes in growing businesses and meeting customer needs in the data center industry. Previously, John held key roles at QTS Data Centers and Sabi Data Center Properties, managing significant colocation and build-to-suit transactions for major enterprises. His data center experience includes work with Exodus Communications and ABB. John has also served as a technology, media, and telecom investment banker, advising on data center trends and opportunities for various financial institutions. Welcome, John.
John, welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast, and hope you're doing well. How's it going?
That's going great. We've got a good bit of snow the last couple days, but a little bit of sunshine melting that off, so everything's great.
That's terrific. Just maybe we could start out, John, just understanding your roles and responsibilities at CleanArc, and just got to really understand what you've been focused on.
Sure. I'm responsible for sales and leasing, marketing, PR, most of the outward-facing functions of the business here. And the company was founded a couple of years ago by a guy named Jim Trout, who may be familiar to a lot of folks who listen to the podcast. He was employee number one and the founder of CoreSite. He was one of the early guys at Digital Realty Trust, and then also went on to found Vantage Data Centers as well. And so he took a couple years off and started a family, and then got back in, founded CleanArc a couple years ago.
That's great. And then give us a sense of your focus. Is it hyperscalers, enterprise markets, combination? Just to understand your focus.
Yeah. So we're focused primarily on hyperscale or single tenant transactions, I would say. So there's certainly some new entrants in the market now with the advent of AI and ML and some of these big GPU as a service players that could lease in the same sort of quantum of megawatts that the traditional hyperscalers have done. So we would absolutely entertain opportunities with them, but we're really not built for a multi-tenant model right now. I listened to, I think you had Chris Downey on a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
I think he's meeting a great unmet need right now. I think there are lots of great opportunities in different niches of the market. But yeah, we're focused primarily on hyperscale or single tenant transactions in our buildings.
Interesting. And then, so tell us about Virginia, because it sounds like you guys are making a lot of progress there. What's the latest?
Yeah, so we've got a large site under development in Virginia on the I-95 corridor, just south of Fredericksburg. It's kind of a burgeoning area now that everything is getting crowded out of Loudoun and Prince William counties due to power, zoning, citizen unrest. So we found a very hospitable data center development environment down there along I-95. Our site is around 550 acres total.
Nice.
Just under half of that is already zoned data center by right. And our plan is to develop two 300 megawatt substations on that site. The first should go live mid-2027, the first of the 300 megawatt substations. The second, call it 2029-ish, but we're already working to pull that date in with the local utility. That's a relationship that's going really well in terms of executing on the construction of that first substation. We also are, I'd say we're probably 95% committed to bringing 200 megawatts of natural gas bridging power online before the end of 2026. So we could get somebody on the site even 6 months earlier than the first substation. And then there's a lot of people focusing on natural gas right now. Our plan would be to use that natural gas infrastructure to bridge into the power, substation power on the site. And then eventually, when the second substation comes online, that natural gas infrastructure would be folded in as backup infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than a fleet of diesel generators, the backup power would be provided by the natural gas reciprocating engines that we would deploy.
And let's drill down on the gas part. How long did that take to get up and mobilized? And I think that's a really good angle, just because a lot of times you could say you have, 300 megawatts, but it's gonna take you 7 years to do it. If you can work on gas as an interim play, that seems like it's interesting. So maybe we spend a little time on that.
Yeah, so as mentioned, we haven't checked the box and pulled the trigger on it yet, but we're like I said, I'd say we're 95% committed to doing that. We haven't ordered any equipment yet, but we've done all the engineering on it. We know where we would pull the gas in from. We've talked to the natural gas pipeline operator and have engineering completed on that phase of the project. Also on the type of natural gas equipment that we would deploy on site. We've already talked to the specific vendor there, trying to understand what manufacturing slots we could get for that and what the delivery timeframes are. So while we haven't signed any paper on it yet, we're fairly well committed to it. We think there's multiple benefits to doing it. One, getting power onto the site faster, as you said. I mean, and that's super critical these days. Everybody knows that. The second is it actually is a cleaner solution based on our analysis. A treated natural gas solution is about 20%, just under 20% cleaner from a carbon emissions profile than the fuel mix from the local utility. So if your grid interconnected, you're actually going to have a little bit more of a carbon offset challenge that you have to deal with. So it's not as if you're really sacrificing anything to go with a natural gas solution, at least as a bridge solution. And then third, we think that as buildings and campuses scale so dramatic, the way they have so dramatically over the last couple of years, that logistically, we think natural gas as a backup solution is probably more feasible and more reliable than diesel, simply because the amount of diesel fuel you would have to bring to a 600 megawatt site, if there's a multi-day weather event that's going to keep the grid offline, the logistical challenge of getting that much diesel in that many trucks onto your campus, when there's also, in that part of Virginia, if you include Northern Virginia, you've got multiple gigawatts that would be running off diesel generators, again, in the event of a multi-day weather issue. So we think that it's a more viable, attractive solution for backup power long-term.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting area. And I know that sustainability is a big focus of CleanArc's vision. So maybe talk about that, because it seems like what you said, the gas can play a role in that as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that Jim focused on when he founded the business is he wanted to create a data center company that had, a sustainability, clean energy focus from the very beginning, rather than being something that you deal with after the fact with RECs or other ways to achieve carbon offsets. And so he recruited the guy who runs all of our energy efforts at CleanArc, a guy named Bill Thomas. And together they came up with a clean energy structuring offering that we call True Additionality. And through True Additionality, what we do is we work with third-party renewable energy developers to assemble a portfolio of new renewable energy assets in the same region or service area where we're developing the data center campus. And so then we work with those third-party renewable energy developers, and we facilitate a transaction between them and our tenant, essentially a VPPA, so that the carbon offset benefits of those net new green electrons that are coming onto the grid as a result of this effort those carbon offset benefits will accrue to our tenant. So it's not a behind the meter solution. We're not developing a massive solar farm behind the meter on the data center campus, but we're letting the experts in renewable energy development create those new renewable energy assets, and it doesn't have to be directly, again, next to the data center campus, because it's not as if the data center campus is being directly powered by these renewable energy assets. It's just that we're bringing new green electrons onto the grid in the same service area where we're doing the data center development, and again, working to make sure that our tenants have the opportunity to benefit from those new developments from day one of the lease if they choose. It's an option. True additionality is an option in the lease. There's no additional cost to it or anything like that. But we do think it's a way to differentiate and take a really big to-do item off the plate of the tenant so they don't have to try to figure that out on their own, 2 or 3 years after the fact.
Yeah. How has that been received? I would imagine that they would be pumped up about that in terms of your clients and customers you're talking to.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it is being pretty well received. Certainly with the power crunch that's hit the entire data center industry over the last, 18 months, 24 months, it's not talked about as much. Sustainability goals and the net zero carbon free goals that the hyperscalers have maybe aren't talked about as much. But we know from our discussions with them, they are still as important as they were, before this power crunch. And if anything, this increased demand for power and data center capacity is going to place an even greater importance on how do we do that in a sustainable way. We've got to get more capacity to meet the demands of the business and to continue to grow the business and generate revenue and margin and support the share price. But we still have these challenges and these commitments that we've made. So if a hyperscale tenant can transact with CleanArc for, call it, the entire 600 megawatts on the Virginia campus, and they can do that in a way with no compromises, no sacrifices in terms of the quality of the data center infrastructure, and be getting those carbon offset benefits from day one of the lease with no additional work on their part, it's a winner going away. And so it's been very well received.
No, you're focused, I think, in the right direction on that for sure. So, John, we talk about how do you see the Northern Virginia market right now? Give us a snapshot of what you're seeing.
Sure. A lot of the folks who are listening to your podcast are probably well versed in what's going on. Northern Virginia proper, right? So Loudoun County, Prince William County, particularly Eastern Loudoun, just not a lot of room for development in the near future up there from a power perspective, from a land perspective. Frankly, the citizens of Loudoun and Prince William counties have started to lose their patience with additional data center development. So the market really is extending down this I-95 corridor. And then, of course, there's been a solid data center presence in Richmond, further down the I-95 corridor, in the eastern part of Richmond with Meta's got a giant campus out there. QTS has a big campus out there, and they're continuing to develop. So I think in a couple years, maybe not even that long, I think you'll be able to kind of zoom out and see almost one contiguous market that runs from Loudoun and Prince William down I-95 and down into Richmond. There's a lot of development and land acquisition that's going on there. Of course, a little bit further to the east, you've got the subsea cable landing stations in Virginia Beach. I don't know how far east that that data center development will follow, because climate issues and hurricane risk, the closer you get to Hampton Roads and Norfolk. But I think you will see a lot of solid development from Richmond all the way up on 95 to the traditional core in Northern Virginia.
I think that's a positive thing, as well as, like you said, expansion down 95, just because, it seems that when you looked at Nova proper, you're right, people are like, where's the growth going to come? Because in terms of if they're not providing the power for that specific area, people need to be creative. So I think that's an interesting take.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned, and if you can speak specifics, totally okay, but you guys are close to maybe planting the flag in some other markets?
Yeah, I probably have to be a little bit guarded in what I share there, but yeah, we've got sites in, I'd say, the south central part of the country in a major data center market. So we've got about 400 acres under control there, and we're just waiting to hear back from the serving utility about the timeline to power. We're fairly confident that we will bring that bridging to standby natural gas solution that we're working on to that site as well. But you need to know bridging to what, right? So we need to know we need to get an idea from the utility about when we can expect a utility grid interconnected power on that site. And so as soon as we get those back, we're in a position to close on that site. We've got all the paperwork, the PSA's done, the capital is there. Again, we're just waiting to see how we underwrite the path to power and the natural gas solution that would go in there. We've got another site in what I would call an up and coming data center market in the lots of activity there, but not nearly as big as the market I was just talking about in Virginia, but an up and coming site, some good hyperscale activity in that market. And same thing, actually, that site, we could probably get up to 11 buildings on the land that we have under control up there. So it could be a very large site, that would be north of a gigawatt, maybe almost a gig and a half at full build out, which would be several years, of course. But again, we'll probably do the bridging to standby natural gas solution up there as well. We think it's a great solution for the short and midterm. And then we've got probably half a dozen or more sites that we're in preliminary due diligence on, but we do not have under control at this point.
Got it. Well, that sounds like you're onto some interesting things. We'll have to have you back and let us know. Interest, in terms of AI requirements, and it's been spectacular growth. Have you seen any slowdown since the DeepSeek announcement and that period where a couple of days people were like, wow, is this really very expensive? It doesn't need to be so expensive in terms of build out. So just curious, have you seen any slowdown?
No, we haven't seen any slowdown. I think there's been a lot of talk about this, again, and it, better than I do. But oftentimes when the cost to deploy or to utilize something comes down, it actually just leads to greater adoption. I think back to the example of server virtualization, right? When all of a sudden you could virtualize a server and get it to run 6 or 10 or 12 different jobs, there were people saying, oh, well, I'm not going to need to deploy nearly as many servers in the data center anymore. So this is going to kill the data center market. And the exact opposite happened, right? The efficiencies that were unlocked by server virtualization just allowed the tenants of the data center to grow like crazy. And so we never saw any slowdown there. So I think that parallel makes a lot of sense to me, that if something brings down the cost of deploying AI, that it will probably lead to greater adoption. I also think that even if it were to put a dent in the amount of power and data center capacity required over the next few years, we're still so far behind being able to fulfill the demand numbers that are being thrown around, that even if you reduce that by a third, we still can't meet that reduced amount of demand. So I don't think it's likely, but I think even if it were to come to pass, I just don't see how over the next, call it 5, 7, even 10 years, we can meet the amount of demand that's out there in the market these days. The other thing I'd say on that is, this came up the other day. I was at a conference in your backyard in New York, and we were talking about this same question. And there have been some comparisons. Oh, this could be like the telco build out of the late 90s and early 2000s. And the point that I made in a discussion we were having about that is, all that infrastructure ended up getting utilized. Okay, maybe
that's true.
Maybe there was a little bit of time, there was a little bit of lag because the internet bubble burst and so on. But all that infrastructure ended up getting utilized and more, right? There's the fiber build out has just continued. Somebody countered my point, and I think they made a valid point. They said, yeah, but a lot of companies got blown up in that telecom shakeout. And then my response to their counter was, but those companies weren't the biggest, most valuable companies in the history of mankind. And those are the companies that are making these AI bets. So I think the parallel breaks down a little bit, because these aren't speculative CLECs and
That's right.
and the other type of companies that unfortunately took a bath in that telecom meltdown of the late 90s and early 2000s. These are the biggest, most valuable companies that the world has ever seen that are making these investments now.
Yeah, no, it's funny you bring that up, because I just, as another episode, really focused on that dynamic. And you're right, when they did have the bust, it was really the weak ones that went out, but the ones who really had the long-term vision and the plan and the infrastructure, yeah, it took time, but at the end they were fine, because they had the right infrastructure in place and they had the right strategy. So I totally agree with your counterpoint on that. I think that was good.
The other thing I would say is that, and to follow on with what you said, there were some losers in that telecom example. There's going to be people in the data center business who don't make money, who have jumped into the business in the last couple of years with this gold rush mentality. And I think that's one of the things. I was talking with another really smarter guy than me at that event last week in New York, and one of the things the ideas that he and I exchanged is that I think there'll be a shakeout this year. I think it will become apparent that a lot of the sites that are being marketed out there right now are not viable for
That's right.
any one of a number of fatal flaws, whether it's zoning headwinds, whether it's an endangered species, whether it's a wetland issue. But just because you can find 400 acres near Salt Lake City or Kansas City doesn't mean it's a good data center site, right? And so I think there will be sites that just will fall off the market because they're determined really not to be viable in the short or the long term. I think there will be viable sites, but maybe the groups that are aiming to develop those won't be able to get the capital that they need. They maybe don't have enough data center experience or any data center experience. And so maybe that site gets picked up by a more established player or by a hyperscaler themselves. But that kind of shakeout will happen in the business. So I think when we come out of 2025, I think there'll be fewer of these sort of phantom or fake sites, as Dan Golding likes to call them, fake data centers. I think there'll be fewer of those. There'll probably be fewer teams running around trying to find capital to develop sites. And it might create a little bit more rationality in the market and separate the wheat from the chaff, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very kind of important trends that we're seeing in the marketplace, because we get a call a week like, oh, we have this great site and we think we could do 300 megawatts. And then all of a sudden we ask like 3 questions and I'll have to get back to you. And then I think you're right. People are tying up sites and then they're doing their due diligence after. And then for a few reasons or one reason, they're going to basically pull out of the contract. So I think that area doesn't get talked about enough. And it's, I think, going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, John, this has been a great conversation. Before we let you go, we have, 1 or 2 personal questions on the horizon to ask you. First off, any good book recommendations you would tell our audience?
Oh, wow. Let's see. What have I recently finished? A really simple, straightforward book I've read recently I really enjoyed was called The Checklist Manifesto by a guy named Atul Gawande. And he's a physician, just talking about how a lot of decisions that are made these days are not for a lack of data. We're almost overwhelmed with data. And so his book is almost a hearkening back to putting together simple checklists to make sure that you don't make a bad decision because you're inundated with data, you're overwhelmed with data. Boil it down, simple checklist to make sure you're hitting all the most vital points as you assess the situation and make a decision based on that.
I like that, especially today, because there is enormous amounts of data that you have to look on and stay on top of. So it sounds like it was a refreshing read. And then the last question before we let you go, what's the go-to pumped up song when you're about to sit down with a major hyperscaler that you're going to really have a good meeting?
I'm going to go way back with a deep cut here. She Sells Sanctuary by The Cult. That's my go-to get pumped up song, whether I'm trying to get these old bones ready to go to the gym or whether I'm getting ready to jump on a call or a meeting with a potential tenant.
I like it. Good choice. Well, John, great connecting today. Appreciate your time. We'll be in touch, and thanks for being on the podcast.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thanks so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Trends 24/7 Leaders. To learn more about technology trends, you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can also read my book, Tech Trends 24/7 and the Impact of COVID-19, which is rated a must-read book by CIO Insight. The book is available for purchase on Amazon or on our website, Tech Trends 24/7. When conducting research for the book, I was inspired to see how technology innovation was making a positive difference in people's lives. As a result, in 2020, I founded Beacon of Hope 365. Our mission is to leverage technology to help people in need. More information on the charity can be found on beaconofhope365.org. Thanks again for tuning into this episode, and a big thank you to my entire podcast team, Peyton Pellington, Sal Fortuna, and Carmela Petrone. See you on the next episode.